The wind sounds like a creature. Creatures my family had told me about. Just when I think it's dying down, it picks up in decibel again. Standing out in the cold, feeling the chips and shards of ice pelting me from the angry blanketed skies causes me to huddle closer to my mom's warm body, till I'm practically standing right underneath her. My mother doesn't mind, as inside of her belly is my little sister or brother. Everywhere I looked, I saw white flittering bugs, fluffy bugs, and icy bugs, bugs that were sharp when they hit your eyes. It was so hard to see, but one thing that I did make out were the strange looks that the other females were giving me. I always asked my mom why the other females would look at me that way. Eventually, she told me the truth, that they thought I was strange. As a matter of fact, Tundi, my name, was named after the tundra, because I was one of the few babies that were born in the dead of winter. When my mother's herd found me, I'd been crying and alone. There was no herd in sight, and it's as if the tundra had itself given birth to me. It was around this time when all the females were carrying their babies that they would then birth in the spring near to the summer. But not so for me. My mother let out a call, which instructed the rest of the herd of females to follow along. We surged across the seas of snow, 50 members strong. And as we were walking along, we saw a peculiar animal that looked sort of like us, but much larger. My first horrific thought was it was the dreaded slasher, a large, beastly, buff animal that used its long claws to disembowel its prey. I haven't seen it personally, but I've heard of many stories where other members of our kind have been killed by them. But based on the body language of the herd, especially my mother, being relaxed as it was, I knew there was nothing to fear. The very tall creature came towards us elegantly, despite her size. "Greetings, younger sisters," she says. My mother lifts her voice and calls out to the wind, shaking her luxurious antlers. "Greetings, tall sister," she replies. "We're on our way headed through here. Please let us pass." "Mother, what is that?" I asked my mom. She ignored me and never broke eye contact with the creature, who just stood there ignoring her request. The creature looked back behind her, moving her long neck to face her backside, and then back at my mother, and as politely as I'm guessing this creature could, said to her, "I have combed through this area. There is nothing back here. Please trust me. You have to go back the way you came." "Is that so?" replied my mother. "Yes, young sister. Many dangers wait back there as well. I've seen them myself. As I am carrying my calf, I am actually headed back to the direction from whence you came. I strongly urge you to do the same." There was silence for a while, and then quiet. I had the feeling that my mother did not like this creature. I will be the judge of where my herd goes. The tall creature steps in front of my mother, an action that makes me more tense than I probably should be. "It is my duty to protect the creatures of the land. My mate is the mighty Glumbuck. He has fought many an invader, and has left me in charge." My mother chuckles at this. "Ah, I've heard of him," she says. "Alas, I've heard his antlers are twice his body size, and he's never lost a fight." "Yes," replies the tall creature. "Young sister, that is he." My mother steps closer to the tall creature and says, "He left you in his stead to protect, yet I can't help notice you have no antlers." The tall female creature falls silent. My mother then finishes by saying, "As you can see, my herd of females all do. We are perfectly capable of protecting ourselves. We are of noble blood and the descendants of the sky carvers. Direct descendants. It is why we are the only members of our kinds that have antlers, like our males. And you do not. Step aside." After a long tense moment of the rest of the herd of my kind looking at this tall creature that resembled us, the tall creature finally steps aside, humbly so, and abashed. "Come, ladies," my mother says as she prances forward with me in tow and with the rest of our herd. When we're far enough away and I've lost sight of the tall creature, I ask my mother, "What was that creature?" She replies by telling me it's a moose, the stupidest of all of our kinds, although being the largest. My mother claimed that they were so big and bumbly that they didn't require smarts because of their size. She said that the larger that dull-toothed animals are usually means the less of a brain they have. That night, my mother finds us a field to graze on. It's a very peculiar place where the plants grow in a specific order. It's beautiful. I can't help but run around in it and play. I wish I had someone else my size to play with. I look down at my legs and I realize that I'm a little bigger than I used to be. It gives me such encouragement to know that one day I'll be as brave as my mother. All of us are standing around. Many of the females are talking. As I bob and weave through the long legs of all the females in the herd, I come upon one member of the herd that is off by themselves, not doing anything, just standing still. Thinking that they're taking a nap, I go over to inspect the member. They're next to a bank of snow. My curious, friendly nature takes over, and as I'm prancing towards the individual, I stop suddenly when a waft of a horrible smell carries on the wind straight from her body. None of our other herd members smell like this, and if I'm being completely honest, the only thing that it put me in mind of are creatures that we found along the way that were torn open and had been sitting lifeless on the snow for days. She lifts her head and looks dead at me, her eyes glowing and twinkling, far more than what is usual. Something about her rubbed me the wrong way. Her antlers stood up straight, just like my mother's, just like the other members of her herd. However, when her head would move slightly, the antlers would bend in a weird fashion as though they were not really hard. Everything about this felt wrong, so I ran back to my mom. My mother was about 40 members in, all the way at the front of the herd. I had been at the back. That strange, putrid-smelling individual had been at the very back of the herd. It's possible a lot of the other members didn't even know she was there. I asked my mom if she knew about that member, and knew that she was sick. My mother said she knew nothing about this. There's nothing to worry about, Tundi. If that individual is sick, they will slow down and become food for the earth. And that's all she told me. Days later, I smelled it again, and I found myself going on the outskirts of the herd just to get a better look at the back of the herd. And there was the individual. This time the antlers were drooping, as though they'd been melted. How could the others not smell her? Another thing that made her peculiar was her length. I noticed, looking at her next to the other members of her herd, that her neck seemed a bit longer, as did her midsection. Her legs still seemed the same length, but her body seemed too long. Also, when we started running and prancing, her prancing looked odd. I tried to get my mom to see one of the times, but she was always running ahead of the herd. One of the times, I got one of my mom's friends to inspect, and she looked from a distance and saw the weirdness too. "How peculiar," she says. "Best stay away from that one, young Tundi." "Is she a member of her herd?" I asked the older female. "I don't think so. I've never seen her before, and certainly not anyone that would stay with our herd, at least for as long as she has. Something's clearly wrong. And maybe she has some illness. It could be contagious. Just keep your distance. I'm surprised she hasn't been picked off by now." "Shouldn't we," I said, looking eerily at the thing that was prancing behind the others. "Shouldn't we, chase her away?" "Oh, heavens no. We never do that." "Why not?" I asked her. "Well, because Tundi ground carvers are smart, and part of our strategy is staying alive as long as possible. And to do that, we have to allow the sick ones to feed the ones who want to eat the rest of us. Don't worry, I can guarantee she'll be gone pretty soon." And with that, the older female pranced off to join the herd, as did I. As I was prancing back to join my mother, my view remained on the strange newcomer. I no longer saw her as a member of her herd, but some strange oddity. As if she knew I was talking about her, her head quickly snapped like a twig being broken in my direction. In total terror, I halted in my tracks, my feet digging deeper into the snow, trying to find grasp. My flight response into overdrive. The thing didn't stop moving. Its head was lolling from side to side, but its rigid, broken-looking neck kept its eyes trained in my direction. Everything just made me feel uncomfortable looking at it. Whatever this was, it was not a member of our herd. I could tell. I don't know how, but none of our herd ever felt like this or smelled like this. This thing behaved like a predator, pretending to be one of us. It started snowing again, and in the middle of a large clearing, I stood next to my mother. Her two best friends were standing there too. They seemed to be in a state of restfulness, not completely asleep, but napping on their legs. We usually lay down to sleep as a group while some keep watch, but everyone just stood up, the snow bracing our legs. It was deep and felt like we were swimming in it. It was very fun. What wasn't fun is when you sense danger, and knowing that it was that much harder to get away, having to pulse through the snow. And that's how I felt now. As I looked up to the sky, I could hear the mellifluous chords and choirs of the creatures around us coming together to make a soulful song. I could hear something else in the dark. I got to the point where I could see pretty clearly in the dark, but with all of the snow swirling around, that made things harder to see. Shapes formed in the distance that I could not tell whether or not they were real. All I could see were the sides and legs and backs of other members of our herd. As I looked to the left, I saw something weird. Antlers. There were lots of antlers, belonging to all different members of our herd. But something about these antlers made my ears stand up. Made little nubs on my head that were later going to be great antlers twitch. My legs started quaking. The snow around my chest, even though I was standing at my full height, started to feel like it was tightening around my throat. My blood went cold. The only antlers that were moving, that seemed to be coming in my direction, sliding past all the bodies that were standing and napping, were bent antlers. The ones that looked like they were melting. The ones that belonged to that thing. I wanted to cry out to my mother, but my voice caught in my throat. My legs also felt as though they couldn't move. I looked with consternation as the thing stopped right before the two bodies that were blocking it. All I could see now were the antlers that just paused there, not moving, as though it was trying to figure out a way to get around or go through the two bodies. The females were still standing, half napping, in a semi-restful state. They didn't even understand what was happening. They had no idea this thing on the other side of them was not one of us. Why wouldn't my voice work? Why wouldn't my legs move? I had no idea. A squelching, cracking noise could be heard. I realized that the creature was the thing making it. What was it doing? The antler started drooping lower, and then I noticed that the creature was descending. As I looked under the legs of the two females that were before me, I could see its muzzle, longer than what is natural, creeping underneath their bodies, as if its face is turning to liquid. And then the rest of its face came into view from under the bodies of the females who were still standing there, oblivious to what was going on. I looked down and saw it creeping out, its neck long like that of a snake. The eyes of the creature were missing. All that sat there like the pits of the deep space above our heads were dark holes, dark deep holes into which I felt I was falling. It opened up its maw, its face positioned sideways. My breath caught in my neck as I realized the creature's jaws were opening far wider than any of our kind should. Then there was a blur of movement, and the creature's head retracted back under the bodies of the females, who then woke with a start, looking around them. My mother's antlers were waving in my face. She's the one who had kicked it. This is real. I was so in shock that I didn't hear her commands, but I could see her body language and the fear on her face. The herd, at once by her command, started running. I looked behind me as I found my legs and tried to keep pace with my mother, and I saw bodies dropping. We ran for what seemed like minutes, and then we stopped. Right out in the middle of the snow, atop a big hill. It was gone. At least, I thought it was. The sound of everyone's antlers knocking together, that used to be a source of comfort and also reassurance of togetherness, was now one of panic and fear. What is it? What was that? I don't see anything. I don't smell anything, clamored one of the females, looking around wildly, trying to see if she gets a visual on the predator. My mother stepped forward in front of me, and in front of the herd, looking out. The snow was billowing. It was hard to see and hard to smell. That thing is no predator, my mother said. Everyone stand together. Make a circle, backs to each other. Despite the indescribable terror that I know was racing through everyone's hearts, they all did as my mother commanded. Then it was silent for a while. For a long while, all that could be heard was our breaths in the cold, frigid air, and their antlers knocking together. As we became even more still and vigilant, the antler sounds stopped. My mother had instructed everyone that no matter what, do not break the circle. The easiest way for predators to pick us off is if we separate ourselves from the herd. When I looked behind me, I could see a clearing, a little space where all the butts of all our members were facing each other. We really were pressed tightly together, and this little empty circle was proof of that. Not knowing where the danger was or where it was going to come from, I backed up into the circle, looking into the air, thinking, could it come from above? I swore I could hear something whistling above me. I looked again behind me, and I see that some of the females had the same idea. Some of them were backing into the circle. I know they were terrified. They couldn't turn their heads to face my direction into this little circle anyway if they wanted to, because their antlers were basically all locked together. They were also packed so tightly that they could not turn their heads from the left or right. Everyone was each other's eyes. But two females in particular, their butts were farther inside the circle than everyone else. They were younger females, inexperienced, I could tell. Every time they backed up, bravely, they tried to go forward once again. It's as though they were fighting their nature to be cowards and to be brave at the same time. I know how they felt, but being a little one, I had no antlers. I couldn't defend myself. Now I was completely in the circle. And so was the butt of one of the females. I wanted to ask her if she was okay. She was shivering. I can't imagine what this must have been like for her. I walked over to her, and I also saw the other female backing in, the two youngest members aside from me. They were adults, but nowhere near the age of the other females. I smiled, not feeling so bad, being scared. And then I stopped. The butt of the female was almost all the way in the middle of the circle, but her body was still at the front. It took me a while to process what I was seeing. Here, standing before me, almost all the way in the center of this little circle, was the rear end of one of the females, the one that was shivering like a leaf. A long time since I've seen one of those. I looked at her body, her flank, and tried to find her head and her front legs, but they were nowhere to be seen, because her body was stretched so long that I could swear she was as long as 3 adult versions of our kind. I was confused. Why was her body so long? All I could see was her sides, and her very long back, and her very long underside, and then her rear end and legs and tail. But the head and the antlers and the front legs were nowhere to be seen. And maybe they're at the front, standing at attention with everyone else. And then I saw the other female. Her butt, too, was very, very long. Her sides, rather. I couldn't form a thought. It just didn't make any sense. One of the butts with the very long backs swiveled in my direction, and then the tail lifted up, the legs spread, and then something bloody and circular came out from under. Oh no, was she giving birth? I've heard of this, but it still made no sense. I could see a long, bally lump rolling inside her belly from the front side that I couldn't see, that was standing with all the other females, and all the way back to the end, where it was now ejecting out some weird black and red fluid. The head of a creature that looked like me came out and looked directly at me. Blood and weird liquid falling from its face, and then I could see an eye, and then another eye, positioned at weird angles, its jaw falling away from its head as though it were hanging on by a thread. There were the sounds of twig snaps or bones as the creature's head swiveled and then stood up like a regular head. And soon the rear end of this female was now a front end, with antlers growing out not just from the top of its head, which was normal, but also from the sides of the neck and from out the eyes. I froze in fear, still not comprehending what was happening. This female grew taller, her legs stretching, and I could hear them snapping as it did so. And as she walked forward, in one weird, unnatural stride, the rear end behind me that had belonged to the other female started receding to stand alongside the rest of the other females, and then it completely disappeared. When I looked back at the female that was in front of me, rather the thing that was in front of me, that rear end now slid forward to become proportioned with the thing that was standing in front of me. That means that the two rear ends I had been looking at that I thought belonged to two different females was actually the rear end and head of the creature. And now that creature that everyone was standing at attention trying to look for was standing in the circle with me, in the middle of our herd. Its antlers melted and drooped again by its side, and then they swung forward like they were tendrils and reached around my throat. Immediately, I felt a crushing sensation and couldn't breathe. I wondered why I didn't run, but that's because everything happened so fast. My brain was processing it in slow motion, but in truth, all of this happened in a matter of seconds. I screamed and I kicked, and then my vision went. When I woke up, it was to the sounds of gasping, something squelching. Oh, I knew I was being eaten. I've heard that sound before. I just knew it. In grief and chilling fear, I opened my eyes and looked down at my body. I was whole, almost buried by the snow completely. I tried to stay still, afraid that I would spook the monster, but I saw nothing but the falling snow. It wasn't as thick as it was before, not falling as furiously, but it was still hard to see. Then there was a rush of a sound receding from me and ran off into the dark. After lying there for a while just to be safe, I got up and realized I was completely alone. My herd was nowhere to be seen. Did the monster carry me out here? Where's my mother and the herd? Maybe they ran away, thinking that I was dead. Maybe the monster grabbed me and jumped away. I don't know. All I know is I was alone and completely defenseless. As I walked, I wanted to call it to my mother, but something told me not to, knowing the creature would come back. The snow was deep and up to my neck that was sore. It felt bruised. I couldn't turn it too far to one side. Immediately after registering this pain, I fell into the snow face first. I tripped over something. As I got up, I wondered what I was standing on. It was something hard but soft at the same time. There was a deep layer of snow covering it. As I moved it away with my front legs, to my horror, it was the head of one of our females. I was scared. I leapt away, walking somewhere else only to trip over something else. When I uncovered what it was a leg of one of her females completely separated from her body. That's when I registered the droplets of red hiding underneath the snow. As I looked around me, I could see these droplets registering everywhere. And then I realized what I was looking at. The bigger picture. We were still in the same position we had been, standing in a circle with our backs to each other. Except all the females were now lying down in pieces on the snow, the whole herd still arranged in a circle in some revolting display of a reenaction of our defense position we held only moments before. When I lifted each of my legs from out of the snow, they were completely red, as though having been standing in a river of blood. At this moment I panicked and I called out for my mother, not caring whether or not the monster heard me. It took me a while to find her. Her head was on the end of a string of bones. I don't know how I knew, but I recognized that these string of bones were actually her neck and backbones. Just her neck and backbones. Her antlers had been broken and stuffed into her eyes, a piece of them coming out from her throat. This monster didn't just kill my herd. It tortured them. It didn't even eat them. Mom. I thought about all the poor babies that were inside the bellies of the females and wondered where they were. As I looked around and saw the bodies of the females, something occurred to me. Their babies were not inside their bellies. Their bellies had been slit wide open, and either positioned open like a span of wings, or slit down the middle with all the juices flowing from them to make a weird design in the snow. Where were the babies? I ran so fast and tried to leap through the snow that I couldn't even register where I was going. Having only reached a few dozen strides away from our original position, I found the babies. They were all hanging on a tree. The tree's branches were going through them, and they were going through each other. Their broken legs through each other's necks and guts. It was horrible. Their innards were strewn up like a tail of a creature who could swing through the trees. And then everything went black. None of her kind believed the story that I told. None of them. They all thought I was crazy. After some time, I would believe I was crazy too, that this was all some kind of dream that I had. Until last night. As I was walking through the forest, my antlers having come in, getting stuck on a twig, I could hear the reverberation of something coming from deeper in the brush. A few of her kind had gone missing. We chalked it up to them having been taken by predators, but there was no trace of them. They hadn't called out, and we didn't see any evidence of predators. Before me was the carcass of one of the missing females. My mind was haunted at the memory of my mother and her friends having been mutilated this way, and lain out like a cruel and twisted nest design. I stood as still as I could, so I would not be detected. It chilled my heart to see the creature with the melted antlers and the long body that was a mockery of her kind once again, standing there. I had watched as its body got longer and morphed until it was able to stand on its back legs. Its mouth got longer, and it grew a mane from the back of its neck and its chin. Long, white, thick hair. It opened its mouth so wide that it looked like a straight line, and as the monster yawned, its neck snapped backwards. I watched as it took different pieces from this fallen, mutilated female's body and started putting them back together, and to my utmost horror, despite what I knew to be reality, the tattered female who had just been put back together shakily stood up on her mangled legs and walked. The monster took her by the antlers, and what I saw next made me question whether or not I was actually dead. The monster shrieked while holding on to the mangled female's antlers, its long, snake-like body now wrapped around her flank. And this dead female who had been in pieces only moments ago, that's now stitched together, leapt into the air and flew away with the monster still wrapped around her. To this day, I will never understand what I saw. Whenever I see the bear, or the wolves, or creatures that all the myths used to talk about on how we should avoid them and stay safe, I am grateful. 'Cause them I understand. Them I can predict, and them I know that they fight fair. I'm no longer afraid of them. I guess that's what makes me the new matriarch of my herd. Being utterly confident, because I know there are far worse things.